g'day Ed, how you doing mate?
Hey Robbie, living the dream. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm very well, very well. I'm excited about today's show. There's a lot going on in the world and I want to take a slightly different tack. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Unspoken Truth. My name's Robert Bruss and I'm joined by my host Ed Anderson over in Minnesota. Obviously there's a difference in accents there. I'm here in Sydney, he's in Minnesota. We love to come together each day and talk about the story that's going on behind the news, pull back the curtain and give you a little bit of unspoken truth. So welcome to the show. We're live every day at this time and we'd love you to join us in the conversation. So if you've got anything that you want to add, make sure you leave us a comment wherever you're tuning in from. We'd love to know where you're from as well. So let us know where you're watching from. We would love to hear that information. Ed, there's been a whole lot of craziness going on in the world overnight, and whenever I look through these stories and think, where is there some unspoken truth that I can share with the audience, I see a few different things, and today I want to take a slightly different tact with the audience and share a bunch of things with people that they probably haven't thought of before. You might have seen it before, you might have heard of it before, but I'm going to take a different tack today, and we're going to talk about the Australian police tasering a 95-year-old woman. We're going to talk about a plane crash in Colombia where 4 kids survived, even an 18-month-old child, a little baby, really. And you're going to be talking about some ESG and Wall Street madness. There's a lot going on in that space, but I see there's a lot of fighting back as well by those Wall Street people, and that's actually a really good thing because they're not standing for any of that ESG garbage that's going on out there. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, if this is your first time here, make sure you come on over to Spotify. Once we finish the stream here live on YouTube and the other associated platforms, I'll pull the file out and upload it into Spotify. So if you can't make it for some reason, you can't tune in for some reason, you can always get a copy in your ears over on your favorite podcasting app. It takes an hour or so to pull through into Spotify, then into Apple, and then all the other associated podcasting platforms from there. And we're over on Twitter and Rumble as well. And don't forget to come and join us over on Telegram, where I share a whole bunch of R-rated content that simply cannot be shown here on this platform. So we'd love you to come on over and join us over there. And we've got something pretty exciting coming up in the next week or so, Ed. I'm excited to be sneaking out the website and launching. We're building our own little community of truthers who are interested in financial freedom. Because if you have financial freedom, then you have the opportunity and the time to concentrate on the things that matter to you in your life. And we're looking forward to bringing our community together and bringing the unspoken truthers together. What do you say, Ed?
Well, you're letting the cat out of the bag a little early, aren't you? I guess you just can't help yourself.
I can't. I'm excited, man. I'm excited for this to actually be happening. And, you know, it's been a bit of a process to get everything set up, but we've got some really exciting things coming, and I'm kind of just teasing you a little bit. There's a bit more work to do in the background, so we're a couple of days away still, maybe 4 or 5 days away from launching. Maybe early next week we'll pull the trigger on it and get going with it. But it's an exciting proposition to bring the YouTube audience and all the other audiences that we've got together collectively. You and I have been working in isolation doing the same things for several years. So I'm excited to be pulling that together and doing it with you, man.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Rob, you're the one with the accent. You know, I speak regular. So and also the audience, though, I'm experimenting a little bit today with my microphone, and so is Rob. You know, we're trying to get our and I've always envied the way Rob sounds so smooth in his presentation. So I thought, well, maybe it's my microphone. Maybe I'm not holding it close enough. But I just want to be on the record that mine is bigger than his. So
your Blue Yeti mic there is definitely bigger than mine. The only thing you're lacking there, Ed, is the late night love song dedication DJ voice. And I've been practicing that for probably a little bit longer than you. But you had a radio show. Come on.
Well, yeah, that's like 400 years ago. But yeah, in New York, sure, yep. But
well, we've got Mark Kirkwood dialing in, and he says he's from Northern Ireland. So I'm sure if we bring the Northern Ireland accent in here, you and I are both going to have a bit of a hard time with that. Sorry, Mark. That is one tricky accent to navigate, the Irish one.
Yeah, you love Mark. Mark and his wife Metz are two of my favorite people in the world. They're wonderful people, and sometime maybe we'll get them on the show, maybe even.
Yeah, well, let's open the door on that as well, because I'll be interested to bring some more people on the show to get some differing opinions as well. So if you're interested in coming on the show and joining us in a panel discussion, what I'd like 2 guests at a time, not just one guest, but 2, because what happens is on the screen, the 3 looks really disjointed, but when we've got 2, it fills up the screen nicely and works really well in a live stream. So if you're up for a bit of unspoken truth and you want to join us in the conversation and share your opinions, that's definitely something that we're going to be doing more of. We don't want this to be a one-way program. We want to get this out there to the world and be doing it in a 2-way sense, and we want that interaction. And that's the thing that's, for me, that's really exciting about building out a community as well, is giving people access to each other, because it's very hard to find like-minded people that are going along in the same direction. All right, let's transition to the first part of the show. I want to take a slightly different tact. And I mentioned at the top of the show in the introduction that there was a series of things that have happened overnight. I mentioned that there was a plane crash in Colombia, and then the Australian police tasered a 95-year-old woman. And we see these types of news stories all the time. We see these things happen all the time. So I want to talk about the plane crash in Colombia. It was a light plane, and when you read the reports, it keeps saying that there was 7 people on the plane, and they think that 4 of the kids survived. There was a bit of a false start there where the Colombian president came out and said, they've survived, we found them. And because they'd been in the bush for, I think it was like 2 weeks or something like that. It was quite a while. And they said that the pilot was killed in the plane crash, and then there was 3 other adults on there as well that were also killed, but the 4 kids survived, and they'd survived in the bush on their own. And they keep referring to these people that were in the plane crash as indigenous. So that's the thing that kind of piqued my interest, right? So if you're an indigenous kid in Colombia and you're used to growing up in the jungle, suddenly you're in an airplane, and then suddenly you're not, you're on the ground for one reason or another. You're used to being in the jungle. You're used to surviving.
Hold on. I don't mean to interrupt. But I mean, at 18 months old, how much survival skills can you have in the wild?
Well, there was a 13-year-old, a 9-year-old, 7-year-old, and an 18-month-old. So the bigger kid's probably looking after the little kid, right? So 100%, you're 100% right there. So that helpless little child is not doing anything. The point that I'm trying to make here is the point that I want to make here as well, and it ties into the police story as well, is that you never, ever in your life rise to an occasion. You won't. What you do is you sink to the level of your training. And that's something that is taught to you in the military. And it's unfortunately, for whatever reason, it's not taught to you in life. It's one of those unspoken truths of how you exist in the world. And so if I just kind of pull on that thread there, and tell me what you think here, Ed, because I want to take a different tack with the show today and not talk about a war, is that if you're in a plane crash, but you're an indigenous kid and you're used to living in a bush, because that's where you live and that's just kind of how your life is. If you're suddenly in the air and then, the next minute you're on the ground and the people around you have died, well, yeah, that's pretty tragic. That's not something you experience every day. There's no occasion to rise to there. But if you're suddenly found, you have to build a shelter, and then you have to find some water, and then what are we going to eat? And I'm sure that they had some of those supplies and some of those things on the airplane as well that they probably could have recovered. If they survived, then the plane probably didn't explode and blow up into flames and whatnot. So we don't really know the full story. It came out that they were found, and then the president had to retract his statement and his comment by saying, well, hang on, it's a bit of a false start. We're not sure. We think we found them. We haven't found them. We think we found them. So they haven't quite got there just yet. Either way, whether the kids are alive or they're not, it made me think you don't rise to the occasion. And it made me think if I was in a plane crash in the Amazon jungle and I was 2 weeks away from a rescue, would I survive? The short answer is probably not, because I don't have the skills. I'm not equipped with the skills to try and find water, to build a shelter. Well, I could probably build a shelter. That's probably not really an issue. But then how are you going to survive? What are you going to eat? Yeah, well, I can live up to 30 to 40 days without eating anything, but it's going to get really, really hard really, really quickly. And then it kind of dawned upon me, like, as a pilot and an aviator in flying in general aviation, you read a lot about what to do if your plane goes down. Particularly, as soon as I take off from Bankstown Airport and fly for 20 minutes to the west of Sydney, I'm over the Great Dividing Range and I'm over the scrub. And if my airplane goes down there, you just won't be seen. So you're on your own in that part of the world. And I've got some pretty good survival skills and survival techniques, and I've done a lot of reading, and I was in the military, and I think I'd be okay in this part of the world. But in the jungle, in the Amazon, I don't think so. So anyway, I was reading the story, and I found it was really interesting, and it was pretty cool. And then I was looking at the next story where it says an Australian police officer has tasered a 95-year-old woman. So the cops get a call, and the call is, there's a woman in the nursing home and she's wielding a knife. She has dementia. And the police come in and they're like lunging at her with a knife. Look, I wasn't there. I can't say, right? But what I can say with absolute certainty from the photos that I've seen, and if I show you the pictures, you'll kind of agree with me there, is that if you look at this woman, she is a frail old lady, and there's absolutely no way that you would need to actually use a taser. You could use a baton, you could use a broomstick. There's 1,000 things that you could use. And they tasered the woman twice to make her drop the weapon. She fell down and hit her head, and now she's fighting for her life. So what that says to me is that the police that turn up to a job like this have never been trained in a situation like this. And look, being a police officer is probably by far, in my view anyway, the hardest job on planet Earth. I don't think that there's any job that would be any more difficult than being a police officer. Going to domestic violence, dealing with car accidents, dealing with death and destruction all day long. And they choose to do it, right? And it's such a traumatic job. What I'm trying to say is, amongst all of that trauma and that chaos and all the things that those people deal with on a daily basis, they'd never been dealt with a scenario where there's an old 95-year-old woman with a knife lunging at them. So they pull their taser out and then they give her a couple like that. It seems really, really strange to me. And I just want to let the audience know, and I want to share this with the audience because it's been my experience in my life that you never rise to the occasion ever. You know, you hear about a car backing out and running over a 2-year-old child on their push bike, and the mother gets out and lifts up the car and pulls the kid out from under the car. Yeah, maybe there's an adrenaline thing that happens there for those things to actually happen. But when it comes to a situation like we're talking about with this woman with a knife and the police with a taser, or this plane crash with the kids and them being able to survive, predominantly 99.9% of your life, you're never going to rise to an occasion. You're only ever going to fall to the level of your training. So it begs the question, and it's the conversation that I was kind of having with myself. Are you really ready? Are you really ready for what life throws at you? And a couple of weeks ago, I was down the park and I was doing some chin-ups like I do in a chin-up workout, and it was a bit wet on the bars and stuff, and I had some chalk on my hands, and I took my shirt off and I wiped the bar. I wiped all the water off the bar, but it was still wet and it was a bit dewy, and I had the chalk on my hands, and I started doing my workout, and I must have done about 50 or 60 chin-ups, I don't know. There's a couple of sets or something like that. I wasn't really counting, right? I was just kind of going for time. And I looked at my hands, and my hands were like really hurting, and I got on a bar and did another set. And because the bar was wet, my skin was soft, and then the chalk was stopping me move, and I tore all my hands up. And I was like this. And anyway, when I got home, Susie says to me, how was your workout? And I'm like, look, and I showed her my hands, and she's like, my God, what are you doing? What are you doing for yourself? What are you even training for? What's wrong with you? Oh, she's getting upset with me, right? And she says, what are you training for? And I thought, everything. I'm training for everything. Every possible scenario that life could throw at me. And, I want to ask you, Ed, are you ready? Are you ready for anything? Are you ready for everything? Because in some ways I read these news stories and I go, no, I'm not. But I want to be, and I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be a better version of myself.
Yeah, well, I think I'm actually ready for quite a bit, but I'll rely more on my wits than I will on physical prowess. But I want to ask you, I've heard stories about you when you're in the Navy being thrown over the side of the ship, and then the ship going away saying, "Oh, we'll come back for you someday." And your job, you have to survive in the water until the ship comes back for you, right? I remember that story.
Not quite. There's if a man goes over the side of the ship, or a woman, so you do a man overboard drill. So the ship is steaming along in a given direction. So say it's tracking north. So it's going straight up north like that. There's a lifebuoy sentry that sits on the back of the ship when you're underway. And what they'll do is they've got a dummy. And when you're on a warship, you wear it like overalls, yeah? And the dummy has got two spent shells in its legs, so it sits down and it's got a life jacket on. And they huck the dummy over the side to make sure that the lifebuoy sentry is doing what they're doing. And he's like, oh my God, boom. And it looks like a person in the water. Yeah, You'd be forgiven for thinking.
Yeah, but I mean, didn't you have survival training while you were in the service? You must have. It must have been some survival.
You would think, right? You'd think.
Yeah.
Not really. Not especially in the Navy, right? So in the Navy, the survival training that you do is that your son was in the Navy. I bet you he would say something similar, right? Because the training would be similar. At recruit school, they so if you go over the side of the ship, like if the ship was hit by a missile or the ship was sunk, you're in the life raft. And there's these big life rafts. You would have seen them before. That probably fits about 10 or 12 people in it. Mm-hmm. And they capsize the life raft and you got to stand on the top of it and get in. Then you got to get inside it. And then they leave you in the life raft all day. And you get a little bit seasick and, there's no water. You're really thirsty. And then everybody's like getting on each other's nerves after about like 20 minutes. So imagine if you're in the water like that for hours at a time or days or weeks at a time. The train, you can't really simulate those things. It's very hard to simulate something like that. And even if you could simulate it, you still know that it's a training exercise. So,
well, we have a show here called The Office. I don't know whether you've ever seen it,
yeah.
but there's an episode with Michael Scott where he goes out in the wilderness and he survives for the episode, and he gets some really good survival tips. You just watch that episode, and you should be halfway there.
That's all you need, right? Yeah. Have you seen the TV show called Alone?
I haven't seen Alone. I've seen Naked. Is that Naked and Alone or Naked?
No, it's just Alone, and it's just a bunch of. It's like a reality show, right? It's the shittest idea for a reality show you've ever seen, right? Because what they do is go, all right, you go out in the scrub and see how long you can survive, and the person that survives by themselves the longest will win the $1 million or whatever the prize money is. Yeah. And they've got their own cameras, they're filming themselves and all this sort of stuff, and you think it's a shit idea for a reality show because there's no drama, right? Because you're really just going from moment to moment to actually survive, and you look at it and you think it's not a real depiction of what life is like anyway, because humans are social animals.
Well, when I was a kid, I was in the Boy Scouts. Were you ever in the Boy Scouts?
No, I wasn't.
Okay.
No.
I was in the Boy Scouts, and we were taught some survival skills out in the wilderness, how to build a fire out of nothing, and things like that, how to build a shelter, and including wintertime survival, and winter camping, how to survive.
See, I wouldn't survive in Minnesota or in the snow. I have no exposure to it. I literally, I don't know if you'd survive in the Australian bush with all the bitey-bites either.
Yeah, right.
Did you have to dig like snow tunnels and snow, like all of that sort of stuff?
Yep. Yeah. You had to build a shelter out of snow. So winter camping is a whole different animal from regular camping. There's no comparison. It's completely different. But yeah. So yeah, come winter time. Yeah, I gotta tell you, I hate being cold. That's why I've always daydreamed about. My favorite movies are set in the South Pacific, like Mutiny on the Bounty.
Warm climates.
That's right.
Tahiti.
That's right. And I still daydream about, retiring in the bush in Australia. I swear to God, because of the movies that I've watched.
The difference between the Southwest Pacific Islands and the beautiful Tahitian women and the Australian bush is stark. The Australian bush it's really harsh, man.
Yeah. That's what I have. Tahitian women. With tanned and beautiful, and
lean to the Vanuatu side of your fantasy, not to the Aussie drover side of your fantasy, because you just get beaten to death by the sun, man, and it's like very unpleasant.
We'll do. Someday you just say goodbye to Sue. Say, I'm going on a 3-week adventure with Ed. Ed, we're going to go to Vanuatu and Tahiti. See you in 3 weeks. See what her response is.
I'm in, baby. I'm in. We'll go climb the volcano in Vanuatu. That'll be fun.
But so turning back to the kids, I guess, when you said they're indigenous, when they say indigenous, we don't know whether they actually, maybe they're indigenous, but they lived in the city.
You don't really know the full story, but I sort of think, why were they saying that? And I think it was I think the story is a bit of a false start as well. They think that they found them. They might have found where they were, but they didn't actually find them. And it seems like that they've survive. So we haven't got the full story yet, so we need an update. So one of the things that I would encourage the audience to do, just along the same vein here as I move off here, is there's a whole lot of stories on YouTube. If you just go on YouTube, I shouldn't have survived. There's a whole lot of survival stories in there, and there's people that have taken the time to tell their story and listen to them. And you should. It's actually really entertaining because it's puts you in a position where you think, man, if I was shipwrecked or something went wrong, what would I do? How would I survive? And when you hear these people's stories, they're like, I shouldn't have survived that. I shouldn't have been there. And it makes me question always myself if I'm ready enough, if I'm cunning enough, if I'm smart enough. To your point, Ed, you said I wouldn't really be relying on my brawn, I'd be relying on my wits. And that's why humans are the dominant species on the planet, is because we have the ability to be sentient and we can future project ourselves, and we've got the biggest brains. And that's the reason why we are the dominant species. But that said, you still have to do physical things, and you still have to rely on yourself from a physical perspective there as well. So it's important that you keep yourself in shape, you're ready for something like that. And ask yourself, would you survive that plane crash? What would you do if that woman ran at you with a knife? You wouldn't pull your taser out if you were a cop, would you? No way, I wouldn't do that, but I wasn't there, I can't say, right? It's easy to be an armchair critic. Anyway, I wanted to raise that point because the unspoken truth is that no matter what happens in your life, you're never going to rise to the occasion. You're only ever going to fall to the level of your training. And I just wanted to explore something a little bit different with you here on the podcast today, Ed. You have any closing comments on that point, mate?
Be prepared. Listen, there are people out there whose idea of roughing it is a hotel room without room service. So you do have to step it up a little bit. You do have to put yourself in, but you'll be. I think people are always surprised about what they can do, and when they are put in situations, your mind has a way of focusing itself on what it needs to focus on instead of thinking. Just think about all the stupid things, silly things we think about during the day. We spend mental energy on that's worthless, right? But if you're in a survival situation, I think the human mind has a way of focusing on what you need to get done. And that's where a modicum of training can make a lot of difference because you can extrapolate, right? If you know simple physics, you can figure stuff out, and maybe throw in a few good knots for your ropes and a few things like that, and you're ahead of the game. But
so part of it, I just want to offer this final thought for the second time. Part of all of this had come from a show that I've been watching on Netflix with my missus called Just Breathe. So this woman, it starts off, this woman is in the back of a light plane with two other people, the pilot and one other dude, and he says he's a photographer, but he's not. He's a drug trafficker, and the plane goes down. She's like kind of snoozing, right? And so she's gone looking for her mother, and the plane crashes into this lake in Canada, and the pilot dies. He dies like in the first episode, and they pull the fella out of the plane who claims to be a photographer, who's the drug dealer, and he's got this thing in his leg, and he's like lying on the rocks on the beach, and she's like, oh my God, it's so bad, but he's unconscious. And almost at maybe every juncture of 3 to 5 minutes in the episode, I kind of like elbow Susie and go, do you know what to do? And she's like, no, tell me, what do I do? And it's just a little bit of first aid training, and then, okay, what's the mission priority? Food, water, shelter. Which one goes first? She's like, I don't know. Water? And just, it's actually a really good show. It only goes for 7 or 8 episodes, but it's really well done because it kind of joins the dots of this main character, this actor's life. She's by herself in the bush, but then she's remembering all the things that happened to her in her life, and it joins the story. It's a masterpiece of writing, actually, and she's an amazing actor, and it really will highlight to you. It's a great show. It's one of those things that you will watch and go, what would I do? How would I do that? And then I saw these stories here today as well, so that's why I wanted to raise that. So check that out. I'll find the link, and I'll put the link to the trailer in the description so you can have a look at Netflix in your country and check that out. It's called Just Breathe. It's really good.
Okay, sometime be sure to ask me about my 3-month canoe trip to the Arctic Circle. That'll
no way.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear that one. That's a story. Have you got some photos?
I do. I'll have to dig them out. They're slides. This is how old.
Did you have hair?
I did.
Did you ever have hair?
I actually did have hair. It was brown. It was wavy. I was the looker back then. Yeah, I got the pictures. Yeah, I got pictures of me holding wild strawberries. We didn't get a picture, but I rode a moose on that trip. That was.
Are you allowed to ride moose?
I don't think so. It was there was no one around for about 300 miles, so
no one was going to find you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. All right, let's shift gears into something. Let's come back, crashing back to reality, shall we? We've got a bit of Wall Street and ESG madness. When you said you were going to talk about that story today, I had a quick Google search of that, and I had a couple of articles come up saying that the Wall Street titans were fighting back, saying this is all bullshit. We're not playing this game.
Well, yes and no. Well, let's listen to the report and then let's talk about it. I don't want to step in my own report. Okay, so as of this recording, I have not actually decided on a title yet for this presentation, but I wanted to get this out as soon as possible. I wanted to get this together. This report is going to be about just how insidious ESG is in the world. And I've always wondered, from a Wall Street perspective, what is the overall feeling on Wall Street, so to speak, about ESG, in aggregate? Now, most people would think that Wall Street types are pretty conservative types, right? That's always the image. In actuality, it's a pretty woke crowd. They've always been very liberal, believe it or not. And I just saw a report out of Zero Hedge about an outfit that did an overall study about just how much ESG is being adopted by the financial industry. Let's take a look at the article. Okay, so the report is titled, Report IDs Money Managers Most Least Likely to Back ESG Resolutions. A new report from a group of championing supply-side economics reveals which investment management companies vote most and least often in favor of woke shareholder proposals, advancing the broad environmental and social governance agenda. Now, this report is titled Putting Politics Over Pensions, and it's a 40-page analysis that comes from the Committee to Unleash Prosperity, which is founded by Steve Forbes and Art Laffer. Okay, so granted, these gentlemen are conservative. They're traditionalists, right? So this is the point of view that they're putting out. But the report is factual, okay? Okay, we examined hundreds of major shareholder proposals and trimmed that list down to what we call the fiduciary free 50, which are the most radical proposals related to left-wing activism. One example, shareholders proposed that Costco adopt short, medium, and long-term science-based greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets from its full-service chain in order to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. What does this have to do with selling groceries? Okay, so next, researchers calculated the percentage of times a given money management firm voted in favor of these most egregious examples of policy mandates. Okay, so what they did is they looked at hundreds of these really weird, wacky, leftist, weird proposals that had nothing to do with the actual business. And then they whittled that list of hundreds of stupid proposals down to 50 that they thought were the most egregious. And then they looked at the money managers who adopted those proposals, and then they graded them. So let's keep this simple. I'm not going to do a deep dive into this article, but let's look at the actual report card. Okay, so as we scroll down to the bottom of the article, they listed these investment firms and they graded them from A to F minus. Now, A are companies that were least likely to adopt these proposals. In other words, they are looking out for you. These are the good guys. And then at the bottom, you have the Fs and F minuses. These are the guys who are ESG centric, okay? They are not looking out for their shareholders. They are going full woke. Okay, so let's look at the good guys first. These guys scored A's, Dimensional, Vanguard, T Rowe Price, Fidelity, and let's look at the worst culprits. At the bottom, you have BNB Paribas, Store Brand Asset, Northern Trust, Swiss Canto, Deutsche Bank, Invesco, First Trust, Guggenheim, ProFund Advisors. Okay, so do you see your company on the list here anywhere? Well, these are the grades that they're getting. And I'll just scroll slowly through the list here so you can see whether your investment company, the company you have your 401k with or your IRA with or just or mutual fund, see whether they appear on the list and you can check out their grade. Okay, so obviously we see a gradation, right? We do see many investment companies going woke and actually adopting these weird proposals being put out by their leftist shareholders. But then you have other people who are sticking to their guns and they're looking out for their shareholders. So where do your priorities lie? Are you more interested in your companies having high ESG scores, or are you more interested in the performance of your pension accounts? In the description below, please let me know what you think about what the priority should be on. Okay.
What the fuck is wrong with people, man?
I mean, look, you gotta wonder, right? How woke are people really? How woke do they really want to be? If it's going to affect your investments, your money, the growth of your money, will that change your mind a little bit? Will you say, well, maybe I should? And so I'd encourage everyone out there, check with you, find out whether your bank, whether you're the investment firm that you have your 401k at, or your mutual fund, look into them a little bit and see how devoted they are to ESG policies. The more devoted they are to ESG policies, the less they're looking out for you. Okay, so they're looking to score points so they can get invited to the right parties, in Switzerland, and they're not looking out for you. So you should find out if you have a company that's gone woke, fire that company and find a company that will look out for your interests.
So Ed, you've been part of this financial scene your whole life, right? Since 1987, well, a large part of your life anyway. So you none of this ever existed. This ESG, environmental, social governance, you never used to grade a company by how inclusive they were or how progressive or how conservative they were. You never graded a company by its ideology, for lack of, I don't know how else to say that. Company performance is not graded by ideology, it's graded by a balance sheet. And the balance sheet, if that's positive, well, there's good results for them. If it's negatives, well, there's shit results for them. But now now they've introduced this ESG thing, and they're grading a company by environment, whether they have green credentials or not, whatever that means, their social inclusion and the way that they govern. Okay, governance is a good one, but governance is a matter of regulation. The SEC are the ones who govern public companies, and they're the ones that say how you do or you don't do things, and they're the ones that wield the stick and apply that stick regularly, in fact. So what do you think? This is only really in the last 3 or 4 years that this has actually come to pass.
Well, actually, ever since I've been in the industry, there always have been mutual funds or products or companies that focused on a certain segment of the market, like some social part of the company. There have been some, I forget what the exact term is, but they say, we're not going to invest in gas companies or oil companies.
It's like social responsibility, right?
There you go. Thank you very much. Yeah. Socially responsible company. And they would, but they were transparent about it. They'd say, well, so if your values line up with what we're doing, that's what we're doing, right? So you have a menu. Okay, well, so you can decide. Well, I'm willing to give up a little bit of yield if that guy, reflects my values. Okay, I get that. But what we're seeing right now is just a total grab of these companies right now. Who no, hey, look, if one of these companies, if BNP Paribas has said in their prospectus, our focus is on ESG stuff. So if that reflects your values, we're your people. That's one thing. But these people, they have fiduciary responsibilities to their shareholders, right? To give them the best return on their money.
Yeah, but here's the problem that people don't understand, and this is the unspoken truth behind it all. And you and I have had this conversation a fair bit. So these companies are all owned or all some version of subsidiaries of BlackRock or Blackstone. And if they don't comply with those ESG requirements, then no more funding will be given to them. So when they need to go and raise capital, whether that's share buybacks or whatever they're doing to raise capital, that goes away if they don't have compliance with those ESG rules and regulations that are there. Right. And not a lot of people understand that. They're like, well, why are these companies even if your balance sheet is the only thing that matters to the performance of your business and your returns, why are they doing this ESG thing? Well, the reason is because they're not going to get any more funding. Remember, it even happened to Elon Musk at Tesla, right? When he was talking about Bitcoin and having Bitcoin and using that as a method of transacting and all of a sudden he had to backpedal on that. And when you look closely at who owns that and who has a large slice of it, it's these companies like the BlackRocks of the world, because they own everything. And right. They're the ones that say what happens and what doesn't happen. They're the ones that wield all the power. I just want to highlight something here as well and open the discussion on this part as well, Ed, because I think it's a really important point. So we've had the environment minister, and you know I don't like this guy here in Australia, Chris Bowen. He's an absolute fool, and he's the one governing the Australian government ESG part of our policies here that run this country. So here in Australia, we produce less than 1% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, next to nothing. And they want to have a net zero policy by 2050 and 80% of renewables by 2030, which is it's going to be next to impossible. And I think I've mentioned this before, but there's one caveat that I haven't mentioned before that kind of came out in mainstream media yesterday that I didn't know about. And that is we need to install 22,000 solar panels per day for the next 10 years or 8 years until 2030, whenever it is, 7 years, in order to meet that target for their solar farms that they want. So, okay, cool. So we get the solar panels and we install them, and 8 years, so we install some today, and in 8 years' time, they're halfway through their life, and in another 8 years' time, they're dead and they have to be replaced. So we end up in this endless, perpetual cycle of having to replace this hardware. But then in order for the solar farms to be usable and manageable and to actually do something with this solar farm, we need some batteries. And the cobalt that goes in those batteries doesn't come out of the ground here in Australia. And even if it did come out of the ground here in Australia, we produce about 4% of it. It goes to the battery companies in China, who are now our enemy, because they're not very friendly, they're pretty aggressive towards us. And then it comes back to us. So if you could have the indigenous way of actually producing that, if we produce the solar panels here and then we produce the batteries here, okay, I could get on board with you.
Yeah.
But I can't, because the cobalt that goes in the batteries is dug out of the ground by child labor. So Chris Bowen is perpetuating child slave labor. And it came out yesterday that, and this has always been there, it's just something that I didn't know. And maybe I'm being a mouthpiece of deep state, but I don't think so. Where the solar panels are actually made in China is where the concentration camps are, where the Uyghurs are. So the Uyghurs are captured and rounded up by the Chinese and put into forced labor camps, and guess what they're making? Solar panels. So not only do the solar panels get made by slave labor, maybe not slave labor, maybe that's a bit far, right? So I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, forced labor. So these people have no choice. They have to go to these Chinese re-education camps, and part of what they do in their re-education is go to work. And they go to work making solar panels for Australia. So where not only do we need 22,000 of these things installed every day, not just bought, but installed every day, they're being made by slave labor, and then the ingredients that go in the batteries that go with the solar farms are made by child labor and, same again, forced labor. But then on top of that, we need 40 wind turbines to be deployed every month. And the return on your investment on the wind turbine is 18 to 20 years. And then you have this awful destruction of landscape and wildlife. And then on top of all of that, you need more than 10,000 kilometers of transmission lines to go with it. So who's paying for all of this?
Well,
my grandkids.
Of course. This is a fantasy. If you live in a fantasy land, this solar panel fantasy has been around since I was in high school. That's when it first started taking off. And even though they've gotten maybe a little more efficient, a little bit better, they've never been economically viable. Oh, but they will be. Oh, but they will be. Well, hey, it's going on 40 years now, and but they will be. But they will be. And then you look. Maybe someday they'll perfect that guy. Okay, then let's make the switch. But let's not go all in now.
It's crazy.
But listen, even then, I wouldn't go all in. Where the hell are the environmentalists screaming about the toxic material in these solar panels. And those are non-recyclable. They go right into the landfill, and they're going to leach into your water.
So the reason I raised that about Chris Bowen and his idiotic policies, first of all, it's damaging this country because it's costing us gazillions of dollars. So if you're spending all that money, so give them the benefit of the doubt and say they hit their target. We get to 80% of renewables on our grid in the next 7 to 8 years, and they hit their target. Okay, cool. So we got there. We only produce like 1% of the world's greenhouse gases. But it also came out in a study that the CSIRO here in Australia, the government body, the science body that governs science here in Australia, is saying that we sequester 4 times what we produce because of our land mass and because of there's so much vegetation on the land. So we're already at net zero times 4. And now you want to go and destroy the country economically. So let me tie it back to the ESG thing, right?
Yeah.
So we have an absolute fool who is in charge of this, and he's a fool. He came out last week and put a video out about how nuclear energy was all of these really bad things, and 2 hours later it was taken down. And he's a liar and a fool, and he's created so much discourse for the industry here in Australia and make this the laughingstock of the world because of his behaviour and the things that he said. But his policies of building 10,000 kilometres of transmission lines, all of these solar farms and these wind farms are going to be implemented. It's not like somebody from the federal government is actually laying the foundation for the new wind turbine there. No one's pouring the concrete or making the slab for that wind turbine from the government. They're all contractors. And these contracting companies are large, major corporations that have been tendered for by the Australian government. And these are the ESG companies. These companies are perpetuating this madness because they're like, yeah, we'll do it. How many millions of dollars do we get? How many billions of dollars do we get? We'll put our hand up. We'll do it. Look, here's our credentials. Here's our tender application. And it's just perpetuating it. And if this ESG garbage didn't exist, those companies probably would still exist, but not in the same way. And the ideology behind it is just not there either.
The free market is always the best way to go. The free market will find a solution for everything. If it's profit motivated, because there's going to be competition there, and some guy in his garage is going to find a little better way to improve on a way of producing power. We're talking one of these days. Pretty soon, you and I are going to have a deep conversation about these anti-gravity engines that have been invented and life changer. Oh, here he goes. He can't wait.
Secrets to anti-gravity propulsion were uncovered and squared away in the 1950s.
Yeah.
But it's all just been buried by deep state. I was reading all the UFO stories in there last night.
Yeah. So stay tuned on that, people. That's going to be a barn burner. That segment. But listen, where are all these environmentalists and these animal lovers regarding these windmills, also known as bird blenders? Apparently,
I saw on that point. I saw one. There's a picture of a solar farm in the US somewhere. I don't know where it was. It looked like it was in a desert somewhere. And I'm like, how windy does it get in a desert? Like, it must get windy. They sighted the farm there, right? And it said in the next 12 months, this wind farm will kill 3,000 eagles. I'm like, really? What are the eagles doing flying around on a wind farm?
Oh yeah, you go to the wind farms and you look on the ground underneath the windmills. You see carcasses everywhere.
Really, I didn't know that about wind farms. I only learned that in the last couple of weeks, really. And then I saw that yesterday. I was like, really? That's a lot of eagles, man.
Yep. Plus, those propellers, they're not recyclable either. They go in the landfill and they never decompose. Right. So where are you, environmentalists? I'm the real environmentalist in this whole conversation.
The silence is deafening, isn't it?
And this proves the point, I think, even more, that this isn't about the environment. None of this stuff is about the environment. This is an agenda. It's about power. It's about control. It's about how you will own nothing by 2030, and you will like it. So that's what this is about. They think of the solution first, and then they create the problem. Well, how can we get the power? Well, let's scare the hell out of them. About whatever. I heard today that the CDC apparently has their next pandemic all queued up, ready to go.
Bird flu, baby.
Yeah, and it's all and it's centered around the kids. So they're ready to go. They saw how hugely successful this worldwide global flu was, and how we.
Do you think people would be so compliant this time around?
No, I really don't. I think I think next time around there's going to be no.
On that point, I saw that Ron DeSantis had put his hat into the ring and he's going to run, and I thought to myself, because tying it back to what you just said about, they've said the next pandemic will be bird flu. If you don't know, ladies and gentlemen, bird flu has been a big thing in northern Canada and the northern hemisphere in the last couple of months, where large populations of animals dying from it, and then other mammals eating the dead birds on the ground and it being transmitted. So there was a series of things that happened in Canada there, and then bird flu is in the UK, and it said that a couple of people, two workers, were infected with bird flu in that part of the world, and they're like, oh my God, this could be like 1919 or 1918 pandemic, whatever it was. That was bird flu right back then, or it was swine flu. Who knows what to believe with any of these people, man. And I look at it and think, all these zombies that are out there sticking experimental things into their arms, it's just unbelievable. On my Twitter, there's a handle called Died Suddenly on Twitter. Now, I don't know if you ever watched that documentary about what happened and what it is. It's all the morticians.
I watched. Yep, I watched that. You sent it to me, and I watched it. Everyone, you should put that in the link below. That's something everybody should watch. It is.
So all the morticians going back through getting people ready for burial and stuff, and seeing all of the same things, and they all coming together going, have you seen this before, man? No, I haven't. And, literally hundreds and hundreds of cases coming together. And on my Twitter, a couple of times a day, there's a report of this person or that person who died, because I saw one, it's a picture of a guy wearing like 2 masks, and he had his fifth injection, and then he died shortly after his 5th injection. And I'm like, dude, if you injected anything into your body 5 times, you were going to die. If I have 5 cups of coffee in the next hour, I'll probably die from a heart attack, man. Seriously, what did you think was going to happen? But a couple of times a day, there's a report of this person died and this person died. And then I was looking at, just in my YouTube feed at the end of the day yesterday when I was chilling out a little bit, and I saw there's a woman here in Australia, her name's Dr. Karen Phelps. So she's one of those TV doctors from the 1990s who was always on TV. She used to be on the radio and stuff. She became a politician. She actually knocked Malcolm Turnbull off his perch during the election a couple of years ago, but never held on to that seat because she's just, a bit divisive. But anyway, her partner got really sick after she got one of the in her arms, and then she went ahead and still went and got this number 2, even after a partner got really crook, and then was really quite badly injured as well. And here, once again, I was sitting there thinking, okay, you're a doctor and you have all of these credentials. It goes to the very heart of that conversation we've had a couple of times now, where anybody that ever appears on TV and pretends to be the expert on TV is wrong 100% of the time. No person is able to predict the future. And these pundits that go on TV, especially these medical pundits that go on TV, trying to predict the future that everything's going to be all right, are 100% wrong 100% of the time. And when I was saying that, I remember saying that a couple of years, my daughter, she's like, what do we do, Dad? What do we do? And I'm like, whatever you do, don't listen to anybody. Don't listen to any politician. Don't listen to any doctor. Don't listen to any police officer. Don't listen to anything that anybody tells you. You're a sovereign human being able to make their own decisions about their own life, and you don't have to do anything that you don't want to do, and you especially don't have to do anything that somebody else tells you to do. And it goes, what we're talking about here relates exactly to the ESG stuff on Wall Street. It's environment, social, and governance. And social means social inclusion. If you don't have 2 or 3 of these things and you can't scan a QR code, you can't come in here. Yeah. Good. I never want to go in there. And when I look in there, I remember walking past, and I've said to you before, when all of that happened, when apartheid took over here in Australia, in New South Wales, and they segregated our society with the haves and have-nots. I remember walking past the restaurant and it was this time of the year. It was like cold and wintry, and like me and Susie are kind of walking, and like she's like looking in there longingly into the restaurant, wanting to go in there and, sit and have a nice meal. Favorite restaurant, I want to go in there. And I'm like, see all those people in there? She's like, yeah. And I said, half of them are going to be dead in the next 18 months, and the other half of them are going to be sick for the rest of their life. Yeah. Suck fucking shit. And she's like, ugh. And I said, remember what I said to you at the start of this thing, that everything that you've had up until now, that's all you're getting. You're probably not going to go overseas again because of all of these rules, or at least not for at least 5 or 6 years. And then all of this garbage that goes on and the segregation in our society, that's not going away for at least 5 years. So I hope you enjoyed the ride until now, and you did live every day like it was the last. And here we are. I was right.
I hope Susie appreciates the joyfulness you bring to her. You bring her every day. The spirit of optimism and joy for life. Quick response. So one of our listeners here, Mark Kirkwood. Hey, Mark. Hey, buddy, again. He said Rolls-Royce is developing a van-sized nuclear reactor here in the UK, in the early stages at the moment. Okay, so that's the first time I heard about that. I don't know whether I would want a nuclear reactor driving around the neighborhood in a van.
Well, nuclear technology is like super mature. If you look at the rovers on Mars, they use nuclear reactors.
Yeah.
And
the nuclear energy isn't what it was back in the 70s during the 3 Mile Island accident. Because everyone, remember, that's the image everyone has, right? Between that and Chernobyl, that's the image they have for nuclear power. Okay, it'll melt down and it'll melt to the core of the earth, and but it's not. Today's nuclear energy isn't your dad's nuclear energy. It's a different animal now. It's a whole different.
There was one of Chris Bowen's idiotic statements that he made last week was saying that nuclear energy is like the most expensive energy in the world for consumers. And there's a guy, I'll find the video and I'll clip it and make it a short and put it on the channel. But he's like a nuclear scientist, right? And he knows what he's talking about. He worked for Ansto here in Australia, and he's come out. He's like, it's not the most. Look, here's all these. Here's South Korea. Here's the UAE. Here's this country. Here's that country. And he shows how the power prices are going down when they deploy new nuclear energy. And then Chris Bowen comes out and says, it takes 25 years to build a power plant. No, it doesn't. In the last 12 to 18 months in the UAE, they've rolled out 4 or 5 reactors, and it's lowered the power prices there in the UAE. And they're going to roll out 25 reactors in the next couple of years to fix their power supply, which will supply 25% of their grid or something like that. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but what he was essentially doing was taking everything that Chris Bowen's the elected person supposed to be responsible for all of these things. And this guy, in less than 2 minutes, took every line item that he said, no, wrong, that's a lie, not true, incorrect. And at the end of Chris Bowen's video, he shows a yellow barrel with a nuclear symbol on it, right? And apparently that's highly, highly offensive to people in that industry because it has a Simpsons connotation and it has a nuclear waste connotation. But all of the nuclear waste, so Chris Bowen came out and said, we don't know how to get rid of the nuclear waste, we can't do that. But we've been doing that for years, digging the uranium out of the ground, giving it to the French, and the French give it back to us when they can't use it anymore. And all of the nuclear waste on planet Earth would fit on one cricket pitch, and it would only be 7 meters high. So there's next to nothing. We know how to get rid of it. We know how to bury it in the ground. We know how to reuse it for other things as well. But the Environment Minister here in Australia is driven by an ESG ideology. Our politicians are driven by an ESG ideology. We had the Premier of Victoria having trans storybook times with kindergarten children just a couple of days ago. And he's like, and his response is, if you don't like it, don't go. It's like, why are you perpetuating that on to children? Like, what is wrong with you? If you want to go and get on the cans and go and watch, a drag show up in King's Cross or on Oxford Street, on a Friday afternoon or a Friday night, sure, let's go and do it. Let's go have some fun. Let's have a few beers and run amok and enjoy ourselves. That's fine. But what are you doing putting a 5-year-old in front of those people and sexualizing them? Oh, we're not sexualizing and we're not doing this, we're not doing that. There's a bunch of trans activists out there that have come out. There's just several of them that have been found to be like doing the wrong thing and found out on the wrong side of the law. I'll find a video for you. I'll show it to you. It's actually really, really shocking, man. Shocking.
I've seen them. Listen, that ilk of people who are very loud and boisterous crowd. They get a lot of attention because these are unsavourable, disagreeable people. And they're very loud. They enjoy being loud, and they keep preaching tolerance, how you need to be tolerant. But they're the least tolerant people in the world. And
this is all ESG. All of this is ESG. It's environment, social inclusion, and governance. All of it is ESG, especially what you're talking about there. Especially that.
Yep. I mean, if you disagree and if you push back, they're going to find a way to punish you. And we saw that during this worldwide flu that we had. Punishment was the day of the order. How many people did we see locked up there in Australia in those concentration camps, and they couldn't cross those yellow lines without being charged $10,000?
It was apartheid, man. We had apartheid here in, maybe that's a bit of a stretch because I'm saying the suffering in South Africa was the same here. It wasn't the same. But the concept is the same. You're dividing. We had segregation. I wasn't allowed on the bus. I had to sit at the back of the bus. We had a version of segregation here in New South Wales, particularly when I looked in there. But I looked in there and just laughed because I thought half of them are going to be dead and the other half of them are going to be maimed for the rest of their life. Suck shit.
Yeah, but how many people think like you though?
Not many, man. Most people they're scared into compliance. They're scared into compliance by ESG, environment, social inclusion, and governance, the way that all of this stuff is governed. It's a very strange place that we've moved to. Very strange.
And at the center of that, in my opinion, is the attack on the family and how the nuclear family, they're trying to dispose of the nuclear family and the idea of the benefits of being in a nuclear family. They almost make fun of you if you're part of a nuclear family. Or when your parents are still married. That doesn't sound right. Well, what do you mean you want to have lots of kids? You're disgusting. You want to have lots of kids? You're disgusting.
You know what it goes to the heart of it? It goes to the heart of that when you look back at 13 generations. Remember we looked at that chart. Look back 13 generations and there's 4,100 people in your direct lineage. And that's in your direct lineage. In your indirect, it's twice that. It's like 8,200 people. Imagine if those 8,000 people in your line, in your family line from 13 generations about 500 years ago, were all in a stadium right now watching you dance around with your dick tucked between your legs, dressed as a woman, and you're a man.
What the fuck? Genghis Khan had the right idea.
Yeah, kill them all. That's what he did. He went and slayed everybody he didn't like, didn't he?
Well, first of all, he slept with all the pretty girls in town, right?
And then killed all the men.
That's right. Killed all the men. Anyway.
There's yesterday I watched on Valuetainment when I went for my morning walk. So my morning walk takes me probably about 90 minutes round trip, right? It's about 12 kilometers. And I always put a podcast or an audiobook in. And I'm out of audiobooks at the moment, and I'm a little bit I'm sick of reading books, so I've just been listening to some podcasts. And I tuned into Patrick Bet-David on Valuetainment, and I'll put the link down below. Folks, make sure you get that in your ears in the next 48 hours. It is absolutely mission critical you get this in your ears. He had on Whitney Webb. Do you know who Whitney Webb is? Yep. So the investigative journalist. And just so people know, Whitney Webb, she's a millennial. She's only 33 years old. She's quite young. And she's the one who kind of joins the dots with Epstein, the CIA, the FBI, the DOJ, how they're all a bunch of corrupt, lying thieves. And the underlying thing that she has, and it's really good because normally when you see somebody like Whitney, you kind of get a 5 or maybe a 10-minute soundbite, but the podcast goes for 2 hours. And you really get to see who she is. And what you see in that 10-minute soundbite, you get the extended version of that. I want more Whitney Webb. I want more people like that. She's amazing.
Whitney Webb, she's one of those people who has perfect recall.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Right. She remembers names. She remembers dates. She remembers connections. I also saw that interview the other day that you alerted to me of RFK Jr.
Yeah.
With
Russell Brand.
With Russell Brand, and I watched that, and RFK Jr. for a solid hour, he was naming names, dates.
Amazing, huh?
I mean, it was incredible. He didn't fumble with his words. He had some fantastic stories. He's a great storyteller. But he was, I know so and so did this and that did and that did. He had his dates down. It was very impressive.
Absolutely. Patrick Bet-David is known for interviewing a lot of different mobsters. People that were in the mob, and he talks about all of that. And he does a really good job in the interview of trying to draw a comparison between the mob and the government. And Whitney Webb bridges that gap for you. Because you're like, come on, man. Pat, you're stretching a friendship here, man. You really are. But he's really smart because he knew that she could join the dots there and show you how to do it. And she talks about how Anthony Blinken's grandfather was one of the people that was trying to create the one world government. Mm-hmm. And, Anthony Blinken is now the Secretary of State. And what do you think was going on in his mind when his granddad was mentoring him, saying, this is a better way of doing it, this is the way the government should be? But essentially she draws, spoiler alert here, she kind of draws the same conclusion as the CCP. So the Chinese Communist Party is ruled by one person, and that one person controls everything. It's quite different to the way that the Russian oligarchy system works. And that's because the Chinese government hadn't collapsed and their economy hadn't collapsed. When Putin took over from Yeltsin, he essentially took over from when Gorbachev took over, because Yeltsin did nothing in the 1990s except drink vodka and run amok and sold off every asset and made as much money as he could. In the Russian system, there's only a dozen oligarchs that sit around Putin that look after all of the infrastructure, and then you step out into the apparatchik of the government from there like that. So Putin doesn't really deal on it. Like you see, President Biden will be out there talking to members of Congress and he's meeting with people there, but you don't see President Putin dealing with members of the Duma in the same way. It's not the same sort of thing. It's just a different political system. But when you hear the way Whitney Webb describes the way the American government actually works, they're really not much different to like the mob families of the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it's really interesting. So, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you scroll down and have a look. I'll get that link into the description after I finish this live, and I'll get the other links in there as well that we talked about on the show, because I think it's really valuable that you go and watch those things and expose yourself to that. And in closing, I want to say that you hear Whitney Webb and you hear Pat and his crew talking to her, and they're sort of looking for a savior. They're saying, well, Trump's terrible, and Ron DeSantis, well, he's inexperienced, and Hillary Clinton was corrupt, and Joe Biden family is completely and totally corrupt. It's like really, you're kind of looking, okay, well, who's going to save us? Who's going to save us? And the reality is, Whitney says, nobody's going to save us. You have to save yourself. Nobody's coming to save you. You must save yourself. And she's left. She doesn't live in America. She left America. She lives in South America. And partly because of what she does, but partly because she recognizes that this country, or America, and really here in Australia as well, is not what it was when her grandparents grew up. It's actually quite sad, and she gets a bit emotional throughout it and whatnot, and you just think, man, it was really, really good. Maybe the most powerful interview of the year so far.
Well, you and I have joked, well, in my case, half joked, I'm half serious. Well, looking at places like Romania and Poland, and
those conservative values, baby.
There you go. Conservative family values and conservative values.
I thought South America would be a good option too, because you bang for buck, you're getting more money, right?
That's true. That's true too. But there is no country in South America that is not socialist. It's just a matter of degree, right? So I want to escape socialism as much as I can. But in terms of,
don't come here.
I mean,
they take all of the tax revenue that's given to them, divide it up, and 40 or 50% of it goes to social welfare here in Australia, because people don't want to go to bloody work.
You got kind of a point there, though, man. You were talking the other day, Argentina is at what, 99% inflation now. Can you imagine what my dollars would buy down in Argentina now for?
Well, maybe this morning you'll be able to get something, but in the afternoon you won't be able to because the price is doubled in the Walmart Republic style.
But no, when you're looking at like real estate, hard assets.
Yeah, I mean, that's true.
For what you pay for a house down, up here, you probably be a big ass ranch or something in Argentina.
But then you have to live in Argentina.
But no,
under a socialist government run by the CCP.
Yeah, but I'd actually probably be able to afford it though, because at $1,000, I could probably live like. I should look into that. I should see what the cost of living is down there. Like in Mexico, I think the average monthly salary is like what, $500, $400.
It's not as low, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really, so. I don't know, pros and cons, right? I don't know. It's worth looking into. But the point is, I love America. Well, I love the values that America were founded on. The thing is, our values are not being taught to our children anymore. We have generations right now who don't really understand the values that America was founded on. That's why the World War II generation, they truly were the greatest generation. That's one of the reasons why I love those old World War II movies, because the value, a typical, think of it this way, a typical, soldier during World War II, 20 years old, 21 years old. When he writes home to his sweetheart, his penmanship is beautiful, and he's writing, prose. Nowadays, our Marines are, hey, Latoya, yo.
He's taking a picture of his dick. He's sending a dick pic home to his missus.
Yeah, and he's printing it instead of writing it. So, freedom has to be taught to every generation, and we've talked about before. Hard times create hard men. Okay, hard men create soft times. Soft times create soft men. Soft men.
And here we are. That's the part of the cycle we're in.
Soft men create hard times. Right now we have soft men. Soft men are creating the hard time, because so we are in that cycle where we are victims of our own prosperity. We're victims of our own success, because we have the luxury, we have the freedom to worry about stupid things. If you went to Croatia or Poland, they're not worried about whether or not they're a man or woman right now. They're worried about making a living. They got
to fight for a living.
Yeah,
literally.
So that's why poorer countries tend to be more conservative, because they don't have the luxury of the stupidity.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Very interesting. Well, Ed, once again, another fantastic conversation that we enjoy. We get to explore some different topics here on The Unspoken Truth. Ladies and gentlemen, all of the links that we mentioned in today's show will be down in the show notes. Once I produce it, the end button, end the broadcast, I'll go away and edit it and put it in there. And your microphone sounded great, mate. It was really good. It worked.
Thank you, Robbie. I had such fun today.
You still don't have the late night love song dedication radio voice quite yet.
I'll work on that.
It definitely needs some work. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd love you to come on over to follow us on Spotify, on Twitter. Make sure you come on over to Telegram. There's always content over there that I can't share here on YouTube, mostly related to the war in Ukraine, but we're going to have a whole lot of other stuff there in the weeks and months ahead as well. Telegram's a really great resource for content you can't find anywhere else. If you're not on there, get on there. It's very, very easy. It's a bit clunky as it relates to social media because it's more of a chatting type tool, but it can be very useful to learn some things as well. If you're not on Discord either, I encourage you to go and learn some stuff about Discord and join some channels over there and get into some different communities. And speaking of communities, we've got a community that's going to go live very soon, and we're talking about gold and silver quite a bit. We're talking about protecting yourself, reducing your exposure to the bank, getting some gold and silver, and creating some streams of passive recurring income. That's going to be coming out early mid next week, so stay tuned for that. We're very excited to be bringing that to you. But Ed, have you got any final comments before I close it out, mate?
Nope.
That's it? That was no more comments. You're out.
I'm out.
All right, folks. We'll see you same bat time, same bat channel tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.